going to talk about something really important. If you take nothing home from today's lecture, I want you to take home the notion of what is the meaning of vintage, and we'll get to that in a moment. So very quickly, just a couple of quick facts. In Oregon, there are about 676 wineries, about a little over 1,000 vineyards, and that's increasing all of the time. The number of acres, 25,000 acres or so, is only 2.4% of the overall wine grape. I use that very specifically, wine grape acreage. Remember, there's an awful lot of grapes that are grown for raisins and for juice and other kinds of things, and so we're not talking about that kind of acreage. We're talking about wine grape, and that's really important. Is that places in California will harvest something like 12 tons of grapes per acre. Phenomenal. In Oregon, the average is closer to 2 or 3 tons per acre because we have a very different strategy and different style. There's been continual planting over the years. And as a result, continual harvesting over the past years. But we are gradually increasing the production of grapes from what we plant, and we're learning learning much better how to grow grapes from those vines, how to get the high quality grapes that we need for the ultra premium wines that we make in Oregon. The kind of things that make us unique, and I'm going to talk about other things that make us unique, but the kind of things in this golly gee whiz section of my talk is that we actually tax ourselves. The wine industry actually has put on a tax. It's collected for us by the OLCC, the Oregon Liquor Control Commission. But the OLCC collects this tax that we put on ourselves, and that tax funds the Oregon Wine Board, which allows us to do things like education, research, and marketing of our wine. One of the other things, and you probably have gleaned this from the discussion you've had already, is that there are two kinds of regions in Oregon and two kinds of sets of grapes that are grown here. In the Willamette Valley, this is a cooler region, and so we tend to grow the cool weather varieties, Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, some Riesling, some Pinot Blanc. Then there are warmer weather places in Oregon, for example, in the northeast, where the Gorge, Hood River, Walla Walla area, and in southern Oregon, where they grow the warm weather varieties, Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Cabernet Franc, and so forth. And so there are these two kind of yin and yang sort of components to the Oregon's industry. That's Pinot Gris. They're kind of a dusty, dark pink, dusty red color when they're ripe. Here you see a vine, a trunk of a vine. You see alleyway right along here. You see canopy up here and fruit in the middle. Here's another grape variety from this area, Pinot Noir, big surprise. Again, you see alleyway out here, vine row here, trunk, and canopy. And it turns out when I talk about canopy, I mean everything from the dirt level up, that's canopy, and everything from the dirt down is either floor, soil, or roots. And so there are just basically these two divisions. And the fruit is right along this level right here at the bottom of the vine. And the question is, well, exactly why does that happen? Well, it's because this is what a vine looks like under all those leaves. I've sort of simplified it. I've taken all of that stuff out so you can really see what a grapevine looks like. From a fruiting cane, that is what's laid down horizontally on in those pictures you just saw, will come a shoot that will come up, and this cane is produced in last year. This shoot is produced this year, and just like this is a little node right here, this shoot also has little nodes here and here and here and on up, and there are about 15 or 16 or 18, depending on how tall your vines are, nodes on a vine. But only the first node or the second node only those two nodes ever produce fruit, ever produce clusters of grapes. During the course of the year, there are three basic things that happen. And so you get there's a little bud over the winter, and that turns in the spring into, there's a little bud break, the leaves start to form, and you get, this is where a shoot will start to form. The second thing that happens along that shoot will be those clusters, where I showed you the clusters of grapes in the previous slide. There'll be a little flower, a little thing of flowers that will come out. In fact, a typical year would be that we harvest grapes about 100 days after the bloom period. This process, going from through the cycle, is called vintage. And this, I'm going to come to vintage a couple of times today because it's really, really important. This process of going through the cycle and coming back to where we were just 3 or 4 or 5 weeks ago, here is called vintage. And it's not a simple process. It's not a cycle that happens by itself completely in a vacuum. And vintage, it cannot be repeated. That is, there is no such thing. It's inconceivable to say that you can have the same vintage this year as you had last year, or next year compared to 5 years ago, or something like that. You can see there are just too many variables. It's simply not possible. This idea of vintage is really true, although we don't talk about it in terms of tree fruit or other kinds of things. But this idea of vintage occurs throughout agriculture. Agriculture is always a complex of the interaction of man and nature. The overall environment in which this calculus takes place is called terroir. And again, I know you've probably talked about it somewhat. You have a book on your reading list that has terroir in the title. The concept of terroir is just a fundamental notion of many agricultural products. And we talk about terroir now with respect to coffee and chocolate and other sorts of things. But the first time anyone had this conception of this overall interaction of humans and nature to produce a refined agricultural crop was in wine grapes, and so terroir really comes out of the wine industry. One of the major features is really it's a business. Agriculture, no matter how you slice it, is a business. Agriculture is highly artificial, but planting a vineyard costs about $25,000 an acre. So if you try to do that without having adequate financial resources, you're probably going to make compromises that will haunt you for many, many years. And keep in mind, when you plant a vineyard, it's not like, if you screw up planting a row of beans this year, well, next year you'll do a better job of it. If you screw up planting an acre of grapevines, you're going to pay for it for the next 40 or 50 years, because that's how long that acre of vines is going to last and continue to produce, assuming you do it right. If you don't do it right, then you'll probably lose your $25,000 an acre and have to start all over again. You need access to high-quality terroir. There's that word again, and we're going to come back to it more later on. And you really need to know what you're doing in terms of culturing those vines, viticulture. You need adequate wine facilities or access to people who have adequate winemaking skills, and that applies to someone like us. We are growers. We don't make wine because actually as scientists we probably would love making wine. If you make wine, you have to do something else that we really don't want to do, and that is you have to sell the stuff. And the key thing that I really want to drive home for all of this is that we take a whole farm approach. It's not like we say, just right over here, we're going to have a poster child for sustainability, this one block, this 1 acre of grapes. We don't do that. It's the whole farm. It's the entire operation. Sustainable farming is really a matter in our view, of good management practices, that is really knowing what you're doing, relying on some real data, some real information about what's happening in your vineyard. And maybe it's because we were scientists in a previous life, or maybe it's because we truly believe that more data, maybe even some more data, are really important to understand what's happening in the vineyard. I firmly believe that if you don't measure it, if you don't have data on what's happening out there, you really can't manage it. That's our sort of our motto, and I encourage you to keep that in mind. Ask other people that you talk to about that. They say, well, we irrigate, or we do this, or we do that. How do you know? How do you know? What are your parameters for making those kind of decisions? What is it in your plan, your operational plan, that tells you how to manage it? Well, it has to do with data and data and data. And I can tell you some of the best people, the best vineyards, the best wineries in the valley are the people who do that, who follow, who manage, who keep close tabs on the data of what's happening. And they are also some of the people that you've heard from in this class. And so Jeff has picked those people out because they are of that level of management style. If you've ever read the book by Thomas Wolfe, You Can't Go Home Again, I recommend it highly, but his message there is applicable to wine. Vintage is unique. You can't go home again. You can't do the same thing twice. No matter how good you are, you can't do the same thing twice. So that concept of vintage is a really, really important one.